So my name is Farquhar. I'm a consultant in sleep medicine at the Evelina London Children's Hospital, and I've worked here for just over 5 years now. My job is effectively doing sleep medicine, so looking after children and families with complex sleep problems, but I've got quite a lot of additional interest in helping support people who work within the NHS around about shift work and fatigue and how sleep deprivation and tiredness impacts on our ability to do our jobs. So I spend quite a lot of time doing that in amongst my normal job as well. So in hop, skips and jumps really. So I started out as a trainee in Scotland. I did my house officer year in Livingston, having been an Edinburgh medical student, and then went across to Glasgow to do paediatrics. So I was old school kind of training, so I did 2 SHO years in Glasgow with a year of neonates, as we used to do, and a year of more general paediatric stuff. And then Glasgow at the time was slightly odd in that there were a lot of people interested in paediatrics in the west of Scotland. So we had a glut of people who were capable of going on to become SPRs, but not enough SPR posts. So we all went on to SHO3 type grade, onto registrar rotas, and spent a few years basically on the waiting list for a queue for an SPR number in the west of Scotland, and had a great time doing that. And at the point where I was coming to the head of the queue for an SPR number, MMC was coming in and everything was about to change, and it was clear that I wasn't going to be quite high enough up the list to get one of the last Glasgow numbers. So at that point I jumped ship and came to England, and came down to Nottingham, did my SPR years in Nottingham, which was a year and a half in Lincoln to start off with, a year in Nottingham. I went to Sydney for a year out of programme experience, came back to Nottingham to finish off, CCT'd, came to London to do a year at Great Ormond Street, and then came to here. So I've always had an interest in sleep and sleep medicine from before I started medical school actually, and a bit of my undergraduate training. So I did an integrated degree in psychology, which randomly is the only place in a medical school curriculum that you get any kind of teaching about sleep really. So I spent a year doing that, and the bit I learnt most about sleep, which always confuses people, was doing a term of parapsychology. Because sleep is one of these things where weird and wonderful things, so people worry about alien abductions or mysterious things happening in the night. Actually, a lot of it can be explained by sleep physiology and sleep psychology, so that was actually the most teaching or training I got about sleep at university. I trained as a very general paediatrician, but with an interest in respiratory medicine, partly because I quite like respiratory for its own right, but also because if there is going to be any path into sleep medicine, it usually comes through either respiratory or neurology. So I did very general paediatrics, respiratory interest, but all the way along I kind of looked for and pushed for anything that was to do with sleep. So I did an SHO3 job in neurology in the Fraser Boundary unit at what was then York Hill Hospital in Glasgow, where one of the consultants had an interest in narcolepsy. I worked for the respiratory team there as both an SHO and a registrar, and developed a lot of interest around about sleep disordered breathing at that time. When I came down to do my SPR years, I was kind of pushing to try and pull together bits of sleep from the patients we were seeing in general clinics. Not that successful at the time, but I tried. And the out of programme experience year I did in Sydney was respiratory and sleep fellow at the Children's Hospital at Westmead and Sydney Kids Hospital. So through my official training, I was trying to do my best to piece it together. The difficulty is that sleep medicine doesn't, or didn't then, and still doesn't quite exist as a recognised subspecialty within paediatrics. We're just getting to the point where we're about to get that, I think. So as I was doing that, as I was going to my, what were then RETA assessments every year, so now the ARCPs, the panels and the consultants were saying to me, look, you're delusional, there is no career in this, you need to settle down and shut up and go and do what we think you should do. And I kind of went, yeah, that's fine, and carried on doing my own thing. So when I CCT'd, I came and got the only job at the time for a non-consultant in sleep medicine in the UK for paediatrics, which is the sleep fellow job at Great Ormond Street. And as it happened, at the point where I was about to leave Great Ormond Street, I was actually heading to Sydney. I had a job to go to in Sydney, and the job that I'm in just now was being created, and I ended up here. So I work a full working week. Our service is slightly odd, so the sleep service here is effectively a consultant and psychologist-led service at clinic level, and a consultant and physiologist-led service at diagnostic level. And my week splits roughly half between work associated with clinic and work associated with diagnostics. So about half of my week is spent in clinic. I do 2.5 days worth of clinic per week, a day of which is a narcolepsy hypersomnia clinic that's intended to catch the majority of kids and teenagers who present with what will go on to be primary sleep diseases. So these are relatively rare and unusual, but there are relatively few services that look at that, so we see lots, we run a clinic a week. We do a full day clinic a week that is what we call our general sleep clinic. Our service originally evolved out of the neurodisability service at Evelina London. So we've a very well established service that looks at children with complex neurodisability and tries to help and support those families and children. And my colleague Paul Greengrass, who started the sleep service, was one of the consultants within that service. And we're seeing lots of kids with conditions like autism, ADHD, like any neurodevelopmental condition. We have a very busy diagnostic sleep lab that's doing around about 3,000 sleep studies of some description per year. We employ almost 20 sleep physiologists now. That is running sleep studies every night of the year, where we're looking in a lot of detail at what's happening in children's sleep, and that gives us useful information for some children. So about half of my work is then looking at sleep studies and interpreting and commenting on those and working out what to do with the results of them. And in amongst all that, I do everything else that kind of need to do to keep a service up and running. Officially, obviously, I balance all of these things. I spend a lot of my non-paediatric career talking about these kind of things. Practically, I'm probably not as good as I should be. I tend to crack on and just try and do more than I probably should be doing a lot of the time. But it's something I am conscious of and try to balance as much as possible. And the fact that I make when I'm teaching about this is that I think we are all in healthcare the type of people who naturally want to give to try and make things better for the people that we're there to help. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that when we're doing that, that if we keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing at ourselves, that actually our ability to do that starts to drop off quite quickly. So reminding people that they need to look after themselves to be able to look after other people is something I do quite a lot of. And yes, I could probably be better at doing it myself, but you know, I'm learning. So I love the fact, and I think this is true in any part of paediatrics, it doesn't matter how foul a mood I'm in, or how bad a day I'm having, or how much stress I've got on my plate. When I end up in clinic and then I'm actually dealing with kids and their families, it nearly always cheers me back up again. It reminds me of why I wanted to do this in the first place, for many reasons. We are in a very privileged position where actually we have the skills, the knowledge, the experience to be able to help and support families, and particularly in our case often families that are already dealing with a huge amount and coping amazingly well, and that ability to do something even small to help make that a little bit easier or make things a little bit better for them is hugely rewarding. And I don't think you would get any other branch of medicine, so I turned up to clinic one day last week having not shaved in the morning, and was seeing a family with a couple of kids, both of whom had autism. And the 6-year-old immediately saw the stubble and then came and sat on my lap during the consultation, stroking my face going, "You shave, you shave." You don't get that in any other branch of medicine, I don't think. So yeah, it always makes me grin, which I think is probably still the best part of it. Plus, I'm a bit of a sleep geek, so I still love being able to, so it gets very technical, but you know, the kind of bits where we're looking at sleep studies and we can see things changing. Oh, look, that's the moment when they're transitioning sleep stages, or something's happening. It's great, I love it. So I think it kind of is the obverse of that, actually. So we do see lots of families who are juggling an awful lot already. We see kids with very complex difficulties. One of the other things about sleep is that sleep is often a symptom that is the result of lots of other problems. So a very simple example of that, which comes up in our clinic time and time again, is anxiety. So anxiety is something in the general paediatric population is probably as prevalent as asthma, but we spend an awful lot less time talking to trainees and within services about how to recognise anxiety in children, how to assess it, how to help. And a lot of the time, even when we do that, we don't have the resources to try and then help those kids and families. So I think the most difficult part of my job, so my clinic room is in a different part of this building which faces the Thames. So I look out from my clinic room across to Parliament, and the most difficult bit of my job is around about not having the resources to support families when I know that's what they need. I can't fix their sleep problem, but they need support from services that just aren't funded to the proper degree at the moment, and then it becomes a really hard thing to do, to say to families that I think this is what's going on, I think this is what you need, but I know that that service doesn't exist, and that's really difficult. So it's all right not to know exactly what you want to do when you go in, and trying to get as much experience of different things I think is really important. But equally, I think if you do have a clear idea of what you want to do, then don't be put off by people telling you it's not possible. There are almost always ways to do things, and things that look like a disaster are not necessarily so. The point where I realised I wasn't going to get an SPR number in Glasgow and was going to have to come to England. I obviously love England dearly, but at the time that I came to England I thought that was a disaster. I really thought that was my career was going down the toilet. It wasn't what I thought I was going to end up doing. And in retrospect, it was probably the best thing that happened to me for my career, because it forced me to rethink how I was doing things, and I took risks and chances I probably wouldn't have done if I hadn't done that. So what looks like a disaster, as long as you don't let that beat you all the way down, I think can often be a stimuli to do something better. Have a think about what you want to do, have a clear focus and work towards it, but don't worry if that focus isn't clear early on in your career. It will probably show up in ways you don't expect it to. I still am amazed by the fact that I ended up doing this as a job. It was always what I wanted to do, but the fact that it all worked out is still a surprise to me. So one of the reasons I took this job actually is because paediatric sleep medicine in the UK is still a relatively young specialty, and one of the benefits of this job, so in amongst doing all those things that I have to do in my job plan to fulfil my official job contract, is that we get to shape what paediatric sleep medicine looks like. So we are now probably the biggest centre for paediatric sleep medicine in the UK. We have a network, we are part of an evolving organisation called the British Paediatric Sleep Association, which pulls together all of the people across the UK interested in paediatric sleep. And what we have done over the last 5 years, and will continue to do over the next 5 years, is continue to shape what paediatric sleep medicine means to paediatrics as a whole. So as an example of that, we were part of the work around about Progress, the new RCPCH curriculum. Sleep is absolutely fundamental to every aspect of your physical and mental health. It is even more critical to kids' physical and mental health, and actually we've never really spent much time teaching or training paediatricians about that. So although my job is relatively esoteric and there's never going to be very many paediatric sleep medicine consultants, every paediatrician needs to know about sleep to be able to manage the common problems that come along. So, you know, your child wakes up in the middle of the night and you don't know what to do, your child has sleep terrors or sleepwalking. We have to skill paediatricians up to be able to recognise the difference between a teenager who's sleepy because they're just not getting enough sleep because their body clocks have shifted, and the teenager who's sleepy because they've got narcolepsy, so they can get the right kind of treatment. So we are very much at the forefront of putting that in place, and I think that's phenomenally exciting. We are a very new specialty, and I am lucky enough to be in a position to help shape what that specialty will hopefully look like over the next 5 to 10 years, not just for us as a specialty, but also the impact of that on general paediatrics. So I'm afraid if you're watching this as a paediatric trainee, you will probably find that you have to learn a lot more about sleep than I ever had to as a registrar because of the work that we've done, but I promise you it'll be worth it. So I think one of the things that surprises people about paediatric sleep is I think they think that it is a very, as a very esoteric specialty, super specialised. But actually what people often forget about sleep, and when people present with symptoms where sleep has gone wrong, is that there's so many things that tie into that, that actually I still am a very, very, very general paediatric consultant. I'm lucky enough to get an hour when I see families and children in clinic for new patients. And a lot of that time is spent doing a very thorough, very detailed general paediatric history, and then relating that to how that might come out in other ways. So actually, the most important skills in my job are the skills of a good general paediatric consultant, I think. There are specific skills, so the ability to look at sleep studies and understand what the wiggly lines mean, but that's the equivalent, so I struggle these days, I confess, with looking at ECGs and making much sense of them, but I can look at sleep studies and interpret them fairly quickly. So there are some specialist skills, and knowledge that, because it doesn't come out in normal paediatric training, that somebody coming into our specialty would need to be skilled up on. But I think certainly when people come and sit in my clinic, that's the thing that probably surprises them most, is that it is a really good example, I think, of holistic, integrated, general paediatric assessment and management is the key to making any kind of real improvement, or the foundation for making any kind of real improvements for lots of the kids that come to us. So I became a Twitter kind of convert, which wasn't true. I got a Twitter account when it came out, because I was one of those people that always does it, and then I ignored it for years. But over the last few years in particular, Twitter surprisingly has been useful for a lot of things professionally. So I use it a lot when I'm talking about the shift work, the fatigue kind of stuff, because actually it's a really useful way of connecting and disseminating messages out to key people. I think there's still a big chunk of people that don't know what Twitter is and have no contact with it whatsoever, but because there's quite a lot of engagement with key people, you can then use that to get it out beyond that. But I also use it these days as my way of keeping up to date with research and publication. So I have a curated Twitter feed on my professional Twitter account that takes in from all of the sleep journals, the big paediatric journals, the big respiratory journals. And when I'm coming into work on the tube in the morning, I spend half an hour just scrolling through it and going, well, that's interesting, and I fire some of them to my office computer to print off and have a proper look at. I will tweet some of them out and say, I think everybody should know about this, and look at it. But it's actually a surprisingly good way of keeping up to date with at least that superficial level of knowing what's going on. I'm probably less good as I should be about keeping up with things out with my niche. So it probably is at the level of an occasional look at the BMJ and trying to make sure I read archives and things like that. But for my own area, then that's my kind of little warning system, I guess, to know what I should be talking about.